You think you know tomatoes. You've been eating them your whole life. Here's the catch. There are over 10,000 varieties on Earth, and your grocery store carries about 4. Some taste like candy, some are nearly extinct, and one of them literally paid off a man's mortgage during the Great Depression. Here are 15 tomatoes worth knowing about. Beefsteak. Start with the one you already own, because there's something quietly weird about it nobody explains. The beefsteak is the big, fat, heavy tomato that takes up half a sandwich, sometimes over a pound. Juicy, red, tastes like what a tomato should taste like. Here's the thing, beefsteak isn't a variety, it's a category. When you buy one at the store, you might be getting any of dozens of different actual varieties that share the same traits. Big size, thick walls, more meat than seeds. Brandywine is a beefsteak. Mortgage Lifter is a beefsteak. Cherokee Purple is a beefsteak. All 3 are completely different tomatoes wearing the same umbrella label. Which means every time someone says they're growing beefsteaks in the garden, they're giving you almost no useful information. It's like saying you drive a car. Technically true, completely uninformative. That word was doing more branding than describing the entire time you thought you understood it. Cherry tomato. Here's something that quietly rewires the tiny tomatoes on your salad. Out of every tomato that exists today, the giant heirlooms, the weird-shaped ones, the $12 farmer's market ones, the cherry tomato is the closest to what a wild tomato actually looked like before humans got involved. Tomatoes originated in Mexico and Central America, cultivated by the Aztecs around 700 AD. Those original tomatoes were small, round, clustered, basically what we now call cherry tomatoes. The huge, perfectly round, uniform red globes in your grocery store are the product of centuries of selective breeding. The cherry tomato just never left home. And that's exactly why it still survives industrial farming. Even a mediocre cherry tomato is usually still good, which is why they stayed popular even as supermarket tomatoes got worse. When you bite one, you're eating something almost identical to what people were eating over 1,000 years ago in Central America. Everything else was engineered. This one is the original. Roma. Roma is the tomato in your pasta sauce, your pizza sauce, your canned tomatoes, the workhorse of the American kitchen. Nobody really thinks about it. Here's what makes it worth thinking about. Roma was created by the United States Department of Agriculture in 1955. Deliberately engineered to be a better processing tomato. Thicker walls, fewer seeds, less water, more flesh. A tomato designed not for eating fresh, but for cooking down into sauce at industrial scale. And the genetic foundation they built it on was the San Marzano, the famous Italian plum tomato Italians treat as a national treasure. So the tomato you use for Tuesday night spaghetti sauce is a direct American descendant of the tomato Italians protect by law. The Uzda basically borrowed Italy's most famous tomato and made a more practical, less romantic version of it for factories. Italian chefs are, to this day, not thrilled about this arrangement. San Marzano, which brings us to the source. The San Marzano grows in one specific valley in the Campania region of southern Italy, in volcanic soil left behind by Mount Vesuvius, in a climate that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. One story says the first seeds arrived in 1770 as a gift from the Spanish viceroy of Peru to the king of Naples, a tomato whose history runs across 3 continents before it even got its name. The flavor is genuinely different from other canned tomatoes. Sweeter, less acidic, meatier, denser flesh, almost no seeds, breaking down into a sauce richer than anything a regular can can deliver. It carries a protected designation of origin, like champagne. Only tomatoes grown in that specific valley under specific rules can legally use the name. In 2010, Italian police seized over 1,400 tons of fake San Marzanos, cans labeled as the real thing but grown somewhere else entirely. That's how much money is riding on a tomato name. Next time you see a can of San Marzanos in your store, flip it. If it doesn't say DOP on the label, it's a tomato wearing a costume. Brandywine. The brandywine is what tomato obsessives mean when they say a tomato actually tastes like a tomato. It's a big, pink, slightly ugly, deeply flavorful heirloom that's been grown in Amish communities in Pennsylvania since at least the late 1800s, passed from family to family long before seed companies took notice. The flavor is what makes people emotional, sweet and complex, with a richness that hits the back of the mouth and an acid balance that makes your whole face react. No blandness, no watery finish. A tomato that tastes like summer, cranked up. Here's the mechanism explaining why you've never had a good one at the grocery store. It ripens slowly, cracks easily, bruises if you look at it wrong, and can't be shipped any real distance without becoming disappointing. The exact traits that make it delicious make it commercially impossible. Bite into a brandy wine that was picked this morning and you'll understand why some people spend their entire summers chasing them. Mortgage lifter. This one has the best origin story of any tomato on the list, and it isn't close. Logan, West Virginia, early 1930s. A man named Marshall Cletus Biles ran a radiator repair shop at the foot of a steep mountain. Coal and timber trucks overheated climbing the hill and rolled back down to his shop, which is how he became known locally as Radiator Charlie. The Great Depression was hitting hard. Radiator Charlie had never studied plant biology, no formal education in breeding. He simply decided he was going to create the biggest, best tomato in the state. He planted the 4 largest tomato varieties he could find in a circle, hand-pollinated them with a baby's ear syringe, and spent 6 years saving seeds from the best results each season until he had a stable variety. Then he sold the seedlings for $1 each, real money in the 1930s. People drove up to 200 miles to buy them. And with the proceeds, he paid off the $6,000 mortgage on his house in 6 years. He named the tomato after the thing it just did for him. A large, meaty, mild-flavored pink beefsteak with very few seeds. Genuinely one of the best-tasting tomatoes you can grow. Bred entirely by a mechanic who just wanted to keep his house. Cherokee Purple. The Cherokee Purple has a lineage that reaches back further than most heirlooms, and it connects directly to the people who were on this land first. The variety is believed to have been grown and preserved by the Cherokee people for generations, before being passed to a farmer in Tennessee in the early 1900s. The story goes that a Tennessee family received the seeds as a gift from Cherokee neighbors and kept the variety alive through decades of quiet seed saving, in a single garden, before the outside world ever noticed. The tomato itself is striking. Deep reddish-purple skin with green shoulders, and cut it open. The flesh is dark brownish pink, nothing like a normal red tomato. It looks like it shouldn't taste as good as it does. The flavor is smoky, sweet, deeply savory, with an earthiness people describe as almost wine-like, one of the most layered tomatoes anywhere. It's now one of the most popular heirlooms among serious gardeners and chefs. It almost didn't survive at all. One small Tennessee garden kept the entire variety breathing for decades, while the rest of the American food system had no idea. Black Krim. The Black Krim came out of a war. Krim is the Ukrainian word for Crimea, the peninsula on the Black Sea that's been contested territory for centuries and made headlines again recently. In the 1850s, the Crimean War brought soldiers from Britain, France, Italy, and Turkey together in the same region. The story goes that when those soldiers encountered the dark, unusual tomatoes Crimean farmers were growing locally, they collected seeds and carried them home. That's how a tomato from the Black Sea coast quietly spread across Europe in the aftermath of a bloody conflict. It stayed relatively unknown outside its home region until 1990, when a Swedish gardener introduced it to the Seed Savers Exchange in Iowa. From there, it spread fast through the American heirloom community. The tomato itself is large and flattened, dark reddish-brown with green-black shoulders, almost mahogany. The flavor carries an intensely rich, salty, almost mineral edge that no standard tomato ever delivers. It had been sitting on a peninsula on the Black Sea for at least 150 years, quietly being one of the best tomatoes in the world, waiting for someone from the outside to notice. Green zebra. Here's a tomato that will make you think it's not ripe, right up until you taste it and realize it's perfect. The green zebra was created by a home breeder named Tom Wagner in Everett, Washington. He worked on it starting in the 1950s and finally introduced it in his seed catalog in 1983, young by heirloom standards, but now one of the most recognized specialty tomatoes in the country. The tomato stays green. The entire time it's ripening on the vine, it looks exactly like an unripe tomato. The way you know it's ready is when the pale green stripes start turning yellow, a signal most people would completely miss if nobody told them to look for it. The flavor is sharp and bright, much more acidic than a red tomato, with a tang that hits first and a sweetness that builds behind it. A tomato that tastes alive. The mechanism explaining why so few Americans grow them: generations of people were taught that green means not ready, and they've thrown perfectly ripe green zebras straight into the compost by accident. Farmers markets that sell them have to put up signs explaining that, yes, it's supposed to look like that. One instinct trained into an entire population blocking access to a tomato most of them would love. Paul Robeson. This one has a story that runs from a Russian farm through the American civil rights movement and back. Paul Robeson was an American singer, actor, and activist, one of the most famous Black Americans of the mid-20th century. Opera singer with an extraordinary bass voice, athlete, lawyer, vocal opponent of racial inequality in the United States. He was also enormously popular in the Soviet Union, where his music was celebrated and his politics were respected in ways that weren't always available to him at home. Russian gardeners loved Paul Robeson, and at some point one of them decided to name their finest tomato after him. The Paul Robeson tomato is dark, almost black-red, with a flavor that matches the color, deeply savory, slightly smoky, rich and complex, sweetness arriving late and lingering. One of the most intense-tasting tomatoes in existence. The variety was virtually unknown in America until the Seed Savers exchange brought it back from Russia in the 1990s. A Russian heirloom named after an American civil rights icon, delivered to America decades after the fact. A tomato that traveled a route no product marketing team would ever have written. Costoluto Genovese. This is the tomato that looks like someone sat on it. Costoluto Genovese is an Italian heirloom from Genoa with a deeply ribbed, lobed shape, like a pumpkin that decided to be a tomato. The ridges run top to bottom, creating sections that almost look like separate pieces. Immediately recognizable. Looks nothing like anything in a standard grocery store. It traces back to at least the 1700s, appearing in Italian botanical illustrations, and it's still being grown in Italian kitchen gardens today, for exactly the same reason it was grown 300 years ago. The flavor is intensely savory and acidic, high in umami, perfect for sauce. Italian home cooks have used it for generations, sometimes ahead of even San Marzano, because the ribbed shape means more surface area, which means more caramelization when you roast it, and a deeper flavor when it cooks down. Most Americans have never seen one, because it doesn't photograph well, and doesn't stack neatly. But anyone who's cooked with it understands why it's still around after 3 centuries. Pineapple tomato. The pineapple tomato is the one people reach for at farmers markets, and then just stand there staring at for a second, before putting it in their bag. It's enormous, sometimes over 2 pounds. The outside is yellow with red streaks and blushes, but the moment you cut it open is when it becomes something else entirely. The interior is a swirl of yellow and red, almost marbled, like someone painted the inside of a tomato. No two are exactly alike. Nobody knows exactly where it came from. It appears in family seed collections going back to at least the early 1900s, passed along without much documentation. No official origin, no famous breeder, no historical moment attached. It just existed, kept alive by gardeners who knew what they had and didn't feel the need to publicize it. The flavor is sweet and mild with a tropical, almost honeyed quality that matches the name. Very low acidity, almost no bite. It's the tomato you give to someone who says they don't like tomatoes. Chefs use it for its visual impact. Sliced on a plate, the interior pattern is dramatic enough to stop a table mid-conversation, and it tastes as good as it looks, which is not always a guarantee. Yellow pear. The yellow pear is one of the oldest tomato varieties still being grown today. It shows up in European seed catalogs from the 1700s. At that point, most Europeans had only recently accepted that tomatoes were safe to eat. There was a long period where they were considered poisonous, close relatives of nightshade, and the yellow pear was already documented as a popular garden variety. The shape is exactly what it sounds like, a tiny pear, about the size of your thumb, bright yellow, dangling from the vine in loose clusters that look more decorative than agricultural. The flavor is sweet, mild, and gentle, with almost no acid. American gardeners in the 1800s ate them straight off the vine like candy. Then hybrid tomatoes took over the market, and the yellow pear faded out of commercial production almost entirely. It survived through seed saving, families passing seeds along generation after generation, and today it's coming back through farmers markets and heirloom seed companies. You can grow them yourself from open-pollinated seed, save the seeds at the end of the season, and plant them again next year. The same way someone was doing it in the 1700s, no interruption in between. Flavr Savr. Here's the one that changed everything, and then disappeared. In 1994, a biotech company called Calgene put something on grocery shelves that had never existed before. The world's first genetically engineered food, approved for human consumption. They called it the Flavr Savr. The problem it was trying to solve was real. Tomatoes picked ripe go soft and bruise within days, so commercial growers had been picking them green and gassing them red with ethylene in warehouses before shipping. The result was a tomato that looked right and tasted like nothing. Americans were spending $4 billion a year on tomatoes they didn't actually like. Calgene figured out how to turn off the gene that causes tomatoes to soften during ripening. The Flavr Savr could stay on the vine longer, ripen naturally, and survive shipping without turning to mush. 8 years of research, $20 million, 4 years of FDA review. The public mostly liked it. Then the media called it a Franken tomato. Then Monsanto bought Calgene. Then the product vanished from shelves by 1997. The legacy isn't really the tomato itself. It's everything that came after. The debate it started about GMO labeling, public trust in food companies, and who controls what we eat, is still happening right now, 30 years later. It started with one tomato that just wanted to taste better. Sun Gold. Save the best for last. Sun Gold is a small, orange cherry tomato developed in Japan in the early 1990s, introduced to America around 1992, and within a decade it had built a following most tomato varieties never achieve. The flavor is extraordinary, sweeter than almost any other tomato, with a tropical, almost citrus-like brightness. Food writers who taste dozens of tomato varieties a year consistently put it at or near the top of every ranking. Home gardeners who grow it once almost always grow it again. There's exactly one catch. Sun Gold is a hybrid, and the seed patent is tightly controlled. Grow Sun Gold in your garden and try to save the seeds for next year, and the seeds won't reliably produce the same tomato. To keep growing Sun Gold, you have to buy new seeds or seedlings every single season from the company that owns the variety. The best-tasting tomato in the world is also a piece of intellectual property you can never actually own. If you see Sun Gold plants at a nursery this spring, buy them anyway, grow them. Eat them straight off the vine in the heat of August. They earn it. The United States alone once had thousands of distinct tomato varieties. Most of them are gone now, lost when seed companies consolidated, when industrial farming took over, when shelf life and shipping durability became more important than flavor. The 15 on this list are the ones that survived, some because they tasted too good to lose, some because a family kept saving seeds for 100 years without anyone asking them to, some because one person in the right place decided it mattered. Next time you're at a farmer's market and you see a tomato that looks weird, too dark, too ribbed, still green, striped, marbled, ugly, pick it up. There's almost always a story attached to it. And there's almost always something worth tasting.